I want to start our deep dive today with the fact that, honestly, it sent a shiver down my spine when I first read it.
Oh, I think I know the one you're talking about.
We're talking about a historical figure who's been dead for nearly a century. But if you were to go to Paris, to the Bibliothèque Nationale, and ask to see her cookbooks.
Yeah, just her regular family recipes?
Exactly. You wouldn't just need a library card. You would have to sign a pretty serious liability waiver.
And put on protective gear. It's not a suggestion, it's a requirement.
You'd need radiation protection because her personal papers, her furniture, her clothes, and especially her laboratory notes from, the turn of the 20th century are still highly radioactive.
We're talking about notebooks stored in lead-lined boxes. They are, for all intents and purposes, nuclear hazards.
And will be for another, 1,500 years?
That's the one. The half-life of radium-226. It is a legacy that is literally burning through the pages of history.
Yeah.
It's a physical manifestation of just how all-consuming her work really was.
It really sets the stage for the kind of intensity we're dealing with. This isn't just a scientist who sat at a desk and did equations. This was someone who lived her science until it became part of her very bones.
We are, of course, talking about Marie Skłodowska-Curie.
The icon, the legend. And that's actually where I want to start with what you could call the icon problem. We all know the bullet points, or we think we do.
Right. First woman to win a Nobel Prize?
First person ever to win it twice.
Yeah.
And the only person in history, man or woman, to win in two different scientific fields, physics and chemistry.
A record that still stands, by the way, which is just, it's wild to think about. With all the scientific progress in the last 100+ years, no one has matched that specific achievement.
It's staggering. But the mission for this deep dive is to, chip away at that marble statue. Because when we see her as this sort of austere, gray-clad martyr to science, we miss the actual human being.
We miss the grit. We miss the passion, the romance, the sheer stubbornness.
And the rebellion. I think that's the key. The thing that gets lost in the textbook summaries.
Oh, absolutely. Everything she did, from her education to her marriage to her research, it was an act of defiance. She was a revolutionary, a romantic, and a woman who faced the most vicious xenophobia and sexism you can imagine.
So let's unearth the woman beneath the radiation. And to do that, we can't start in a Parisian lab.
No, you have to go back to the source.
We have to go to Warsaw. But not the Warsaw we know today.
Not at all. If you look at a map in 1867, the year Maria Salomea Skłodowska was born, you wouldn't find a country called Poland.
It just wasn't there.
It physically did not exist. It had been partitioned, carved up, and swallowed by its neighbors, Prussia, Austria, and most importantly for her story, Russia. Warsaw was under the iron grip of the Russian Empire.
And this wasn't a gentle occupation, was it? This was a deliberate attempt at cultural erasure.
Completely. The Russian authorities were actively trying to stamp out Polish identity. You couldn't speak Polish in schools. Learning Polish history was banned. The goal was to turn these people into Russians.
So Maria is born into a nation that is essentially a prison.
A prison where her parents were, in a way, keepers of the forbidden culture. They were teachers, part of the intelligentsia.
Which made them targets.
Big targets. Her father, who taught math and physics, was demoted. They slashed his salary, pushed him into worse jobs, all because he was suspected of having pro-Polish sentiments.
So poverty was a constant.
Oh, desperate poverty. They were crammed into tiny apartments, had to take in student boarders just to make ends meet. And it was loud, it was crowded, and it was filled with tragedy.
Yeah, she lost her eldest sister to typhus.
And her mother to tuberculosis, all before she was even 12.
That's such a brutal start to life. You have this immense political oppression on the outside, and then just absolute personal tragedy inside the home.
It definitely forged a very specific kind of person, a toughness, but also a deep resentment of authority. And you have to remember, the system was designed to keep a girl like Maria down in two ways. First as a Pole, and second as a woman.
Right, because women were banned from higher education.
Explicitly forbidden in the Russian Empire. The thinking was, keep the population subservient. If you educate the women, you educate their families, and the next thing you know, you've got a revolution on your hands.
But the Poles had a workaround. And this is one of my favorite details in her whole story. The flying university.
Uniwersytet Lechezisi. It sounds like something from a fantasy novel, doesn't it?
It totally sounds like something out of Harry Potter.
But it was so much grittier and so much more dangerous. It was an illegal, clandestine night school, and it was called flying because it had to constantly move locations.
To stay ahead of the Tsarist police.
Exactly. 1 week it's in a private living room, the next it's in a basement or an attic. It was education as a form of resistance.
And this wasn't just like a book club. The whole point was political.
Precisely. It was part of this movement called positivism. The idea was that since they couldn't win a military war against Russia, they'd tried that and failed spectacularly, they would win an intellectual one. They would build a Polish nation through science, education, and culture right under the nose of the Tsar. Marie and her sister Branya were all in on this.
But a secret night school can't grant you a PhD from the Sorbonne. And Marie wanted the real deal. She wanted proper, rigorous scientific training.
Which meant she had to get out. She had to get to Paris. But again, there was the same old problem.
Money.
Always money. Which leads to this incredible pact she makes with her sister Branya.
This part of the story just defines their relationship, I think. It's so powerful.
It is. It's a testament to their sheer determination. They both wanted to go to Paris. Branya for medicine, Marie for science. Neither could afford it. So they made a deal.
Marie would stay behind.
Marie would stay behind in Poland, work as a governess, and send her earnings to Paris to pay for Branya's medical school tuition.
And then, once Branya was a doctor.
Once Branya graduated and was earning a living, she would pay for Marie to come to Paris and begin her studies.
That is a massive sacrifice. I mean, being a governess, it's not a career. It's basically domestic servitude. You're living in someone else's house, raising their kids.
And often being treated as totally invisible. And she did it for 6 years. 6 years of her youth, putting her own dreams on ice. And this period, the governess years, it was emotionally brutal for her.
So this is where she had that romance, right?
Yeah, in a twist that feels like it's straight out of a Victorian novel, she fell in love with the family's eldest son, Kazimierz Zarowski.
The brilliant, poor governess and the wealthy heir. I can already guess how his family reacted.
Oh, not well at all. They threatened to disinherit him if he married her. She was just the help. She was too poor, too insignificant, and Kazimierz, frankly, was weak. He caved to the pressure.
That must have just shattered her.
It did. Her letters from that time are incredibly dark. She felt humiliated, trapped. She wrote about feeling like she was drowning, but, and this is that critical moment where you see the Marie Curie we know starting to form, she didn't stop working.
Even with the heartbreak.
Even with the heartbreak and the drudgery. At night, after the children were asleep, she was teaching herself calculus and physics by candlelight.
So she's basically homeschooling herself in an advanced science curriculum while working a full-time job she hates.
Yes. And on top of that, she was doing something even riskier. She was running secret classes for the local peasant children, teaching them how to read and write in Polish.
Which was a political crime.
A crime that could have gotten her exiled to Siberia if she'd been caught.
So she's heartbroken, she's working a dead-end job, but she's still risking exile to educate others. That's steel in her spine.
That is the Marie that finally arrives in Paris in 1891. She's 24 years old, she steps off that train, and she's finally free. She even changes her name from the Polish Maria to the French Marie.
But free definitely didn't mean comfortable. We have this romantic idea of the starving artist in Paris, but she was the starving scientist.
And it was extreme. She could have lived with Branya, who was now a doctor and married, but she refused. She said it was too far from the university and she needed to focus. So she rented a garret, an attic room in the Latin Quarter.
No heat, no lighting, no running water.
I read that she had to pile every piece of clothing she owned on top of her bed covers just to not freeze to death at night.
And her diet was basically bread and tea.
That's it. There are stories of her fainting from hunger in the library. A friend eventually had to intervene because she was just malnourished and exhausted. But, and this is so critical to understanding her, when she wrote about this time later in her life, she didn't describe it as miserable.
What'd you call it?
She called it heroic. She called it a time of liberty.
Because for the first time, she had access. The labs, the lectures.
She was a sponge. She was voracious. She graduated first in her class in physics in 1893. And then, as if that wasn't enough, she got a scholarship and went back for a second degree in mathematics the next year and finished second in her class.
It's during this time, this whirlwind of study, that she meets Pierre Curie. And there, Their meet cute wasn't exactly typical.
No, not at a cafe or a ball. She was looking for industrial space. She had a commission to study the magnetic properties of different types of steel and needed a lab that could hold her equipment.
And a mutual friend introduces her to Pierre.
Right, because he was a professor at the School of Physics and Chemistry, and he had some lab space.
What was his status at this point? Was he a big name?
He was established. He was about 10 years older than her, 35. He and his brother had already discovered piezoelectricity, which is, the technology in quartz watches and microphones today. It's a huge deal.
But he wasn't part of the establishment.
No, he was an outsider. He hated the politics of the French Academy. He was quiet, a bit of a dreamer, and just completely, utterly dedicated to pure science.
And he had apparently given up on love.
He had. He had written that he thought a wife would be a distraction, a hindrance to serious science. And then he meets Marie.
And suddenly he realizes he's the one struggling to keep up.
Exactly. He found someone who can meet him on his level, discussing thermodynamics and magnetism. It was a total intellectual seduction. They bonded over equations. When Marie said she had to go back to Poland to teach, which was her original plan, Pierre basically panicked.
He made a pretty desperate offer, didn't he?
He offered to move to Poland with her. He said he would just teach French to get by as long as he could be near her and watch her work.
But it's definitely romance scientist style.
It is. So they marry in 1895, and the wedding details are they're perfect.
No big white dress.
No religious service, no gold rings, and definitely no white dress.
Mm-hmm.
Marie wore a dark blue woolen suit, and her reasoning was purely practical. She wanted something she could wear in the laboratory the next day that wouldn't show the dirt.
And the honeymoon.
They took the money they were given for the wedding, bought 2 bicycles, and just rode all around the French countryside.
Just a couple of nerds in love, cycling, and talking about physics.
Pretty much. Which brings us to 1896. The honeymoon is over, the real work begins, and Henri Becquerel makes a discovery that changes everything.
An accidental discovery.
The best kind. He found that uranium salts gave off these strange, invisible rays that could fog up photographic plates, even when they were wrapped in black paper.
But at the time, this wasn't a huge headline, was it? It was more of a curiosity.
A total blip. Everyone was obsessed with X-rays, which had just been discovered by Röntgen. X-rays were sexy, you could see through skin. These uranium rays just seemed weak and kind of boring. But Marie needed a thesis topic, and she decided to look into these ignored rays.
And this is where we need to slow down and really explain the insight. Because she didn't just find a new element right away. Her first huge breakthrough was conceptual.
Exactly. She didn't just use photographic plates. She used a device Pierre and his brother had invented, a very sensitive electrometer, to measure the electrical current these rays created in the air. She was quantifying it.
She was measuring the intensity.
Right. And she found that the intensity of the radiation depended on one thing and one thing only.
The amount of uranium.
The amount of uranium present. Not the temperature, not the chemical form, not whether it was wet or dry, just the quantity.
Why is that amount factor so revolutionary? It sounds simple.
Because it meant the radiation wasn't a result of a chemical interaction. Think about it. If you burn wood, that's a chemical reaction. It changes based on heat and oxygen. But the radiation from uranium was constant.
So if it's not coming from the way the atoms are bonded together?
Then it must be coming from the atom itself.
And to a modern listener, that sounds obvious. Okay, atoms radiate. But in 1897...
In 1897, the atom was seen as a tiny, solid, indivisible ball, like a billiard ball, the ultimate unit of matter. The name atom literally means uncuttable.
So the idea that something could be coming out of an atom
was heresy. It meant the atom wasn't stable. It wasn't the end of the line. Marie's hypothesis that this was an atomic property shattered the very foundation of physics. And she even coined the term for it, radioactivity.
So she has this groundbreaking hypothesis, and she starts testing other minerals. She gets her hands on this stuff called pitchblende,
which is a uranium-rich ore, a heavy black rock. She puts it in her electrometer, and she finds something impossible.
It's way too radioactive.
Exactly. The pitchblende is 4 times more radioactive than the pure uranium inside it should account for.
So if the uranium should be putting out, say, 100 units of radiation.
The rock is putting out 400.
So there's something else in there.
Something else hiding in the rock, something incredibly powerful that nobody has ever seen before.
And the hunt begins.
Pierre drops his own research on crystals to join her. It's an all-consuming effort. In July 1898, they isolate a signature for a new metal, and Marie names it polonium.
Which was a massive political statement.
Huge. Remember, Poland still didn't exist on the map. By naming an element polonium, she was forcing the entire scientific community every time they looked at the periodic table to say the name of her occupied country. It was a cry for independence written into the very fabric of the universe.
But polonium wasn't the big prize. There was something else.
Oh, yeah. A few months later, in December 1898, they find the spectral lines of a second element, radium. But, and this is the catch, the scientific community, especially the chemists, said, "We don't believe you."
They wanted to see it.
Essentially, yeah. Picture it didn't happen. They said, if you have a new element, isolate it. Put a pure sample in a bottle, weigh it.
But radium is so radioactive, it only exists in these tiny, tiny amounts. To get a pinch of it, you'd need mountains of ore.
And this is what leads them to the shed. When you picture a Nobel Prize-winning lab, this is the complete opposite.
Erase any image of white coats and stainless steel.
Completely. The university gave them a shed. It was an abandoned dissection room from the medical school. It had a glass roof that leaked whenever it rained. It was a furnace in the summer and an ice box in the winter.
And the ventilation.
Basically non-existent. And remember, they are boiling vats of acid and radioactive ore.
The physical labor alone sounds less like science and more like a factory job.
It was heavy industrial labor. Marie describes her days spent stirring these giant boiling cauldrons of radioactive sludge with an iron rod that was almost as tall as she was. She was lifting heavy sacks of ore, pouring chemicals.
And breathing in radon gas and acid fumes for 4 years.
4 years. From 1898 to 1902. That's how long it took them to process literally tons of pitch blende to isolate just 1/10 of a gram of radium chloride.
1/10 of a gram. The size of a pinch of salt.
A pinch of salt that glowed in the dark with a faint, beautiful blue light.
And during all this time, they're getting sick, but they don't know why.
They were constantly exhausted. Their fingertips were cracked and burned. Pierre had terrible pains in his legs. They were suffering from radiation poisoning, but the concept didn't even exist yet.
In fact, Pierre used himself as a guinea pig.
The ultimate scientist. He strapped a sample of radium to his arm just to see what would happen.
Yeah.
It created a deep burn that took months to heal. He carefully noted the necrosis of the tissue. They were using their own bodies as the experiment.
But they did it. They isolated it. And in 1903, the Nobel Committee comes calling. But there's a problem.
A huge sexist problem. The French Academy of Sciences nominated Henri Becquerel and Pierre Curie for the physics prize. They just left Marie out.
They thought she was just the lab assistant, Pierre's helper.
That's it. They just could not conceive that a woman was the intellectual driving force behind the theory of radioactivity.
Thank God for the Swedish mathematician, meet Leffler.
Yes, he was a committee member and a feminist ally. He secretly wrote to Pierre and told him what was happening. Just so you know, they're planning to snub your wife.
And this is where Pierre's character really shines. He could have easily taken all the glory.
But he refused. He wrote back a blistering letter saying that he would not accept the prize unless Madame Curie's contribution was fully recognized and she was included. He made it crystal clear. No Marie, no prize.
So the committee folded. And Marie became the first woman in history to win a Nobel Prize.
But they didn't even go to Stockholm to get it. They were too sick, probably from the radiation, and too busy with their work to make the trip.
And suddenly, they are the most famous scientific couple in the world.
Which Pierre absolutely hated. He just wanted to be left alone to work. But the fame did do one good thing. It finally shamed the Sorbonne into giving Pierre a real professorship and a proper lab. They finally had some financial stability.
It feels like this should be the happy ending. They have the prize, the recognition, 2 daughters, Irene and Eve. And then comes April 19th, 1906.
The day it all fell apart. It was a rainy afternoon in Paris. Pierre was walking across the street, the Rue Dauphine. He was absent-minded, probably thinking about an experiment.
And he just stepped out from behind a carriage.
And walked directly into the path of a heavy, horse-drawn cart loaded with military uniforms. The rear wheel crushed his skull. He died instantly.
It's so random and brutal. 1 minute, you have this Nobel laureate in his prime, and the next, nothing. Marie is left a widow with 2 young children.
And she was shattered. Her diaries from this time are they're heartbreaking. She wrote letters to Pierre as if he were still alive. She kept the clothes he was wearing when he died, still covered in mud. It was a deep, all-consuming grief.
But she didn't retire into widowhood.
No. The French government offered her a widow's pension, which was basically their way of saying, here's some money, now go away and be a quiet mother. She refused it, flat out. She said, I am young enough to earn a living for myself and my children.
She didn't want a pension. She wanted his job.
She wanted to continue the work. And the Sorbonne, in a surprisingly progressive move, appointed her to take over Pierre's chair. She became the first female professor in the university's 650-year history.
And the story of her first lecture is just, it gives me chills.
It was a huge media event. The hall was packed. Students, journalists, Parisian high society, they were all there to see the grieving widow. They expected a tearful eulogy for Pierre.
And what did they get?
Marie walked in, pale, dressed in black, completely composed. She stood at the podium, waited for the applause to die down, and then she started speaking. And she picked up the lecture exactly to the very sentence where Pierre had left off in his notes from his last class.
No introduction, no mention of the tragedy.
And nothing, just. When we consider the progress that has been made in physics, it was an absolute statement of intent.
The individual dies, the science continues.
That was the message. She buried herself in the work. In 1910, she finally isolates pure radium metal, proving its existence beyond any doubt. She's on track for a second Nobel Prize, but then 1911 happens. The scandal.
The Langevin affair, the moment that nearly destroyed her reputation.
She's a widow. She's lonely. And she falls in love with Paul Langevin. He was a brilliant physicist, a former student of Pierre's. He was charismatic, intelligent, and married.
It was a terrible marriage, right?
Abusive and deeply unhappy, they were effectively separated. But on paper, he was still a married man. Langevin's wife hired someone to break into their apartment and steal the letters they'd written to each other.
And she leaked them to the press.
And the French tabloids didn't just report on an affair, they weaponized it. It turned ugly, and it turned ugly fast.
So this is where the xenophobia really kicks in.
It's vicious. The right-wing press had always hated her. She was a foreigner, an intellectual, a powerful woman, and they started calling her a foreign Jewish homewrecker. She wasn't Jewish, she was raised Catholic, but it was just another stick to beat her with.
The Polish Jewess stealing a French father from his children. That was the narrative.
And it got violent. Mobs gathered outside her house, throwing stones at the windows while her daughters were inside, terrified. She had to flee and go into hiding with friends.
And in the middle of this absolute nightmare, she gets a letter from Sweden.
Can you even imagine the timing? The letter says, "Congratulations, you've won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. But we'd really prefer it if you didn't come."
They actually asked her to stay away.
A member of the committee, Arrhenius, wrote to her and suggested she not come to Stockholm to accept the prize. He was worried the scandal would embarrass the King of Sweden.
And Marie's response is one of the all-time greatest replies in history.
It's a masterclass. She wrote back, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically, "The prize was awarded for the discovery of radium and polonium. I cannot accept that the appreciation of the value of scientific work should be influenced by libel and slander concerning my private life."
She drew a hard line. My science is my science. My life is my life.
And she went. She walked into that hall, held her head high, and accepted her second Nobel Prize, the only person to win in 2 different sciences.
But the stress of it all took a massive toll.
It almost killed her. After the ceremony, she collapsed. She had a severe kidney ailment and fell into a deep depression. She disappeared from public life for almost a year to recover.
She needed a break. But history wasn't done with her. 1914, World War I breaks out.
And this is the chapter that, for me, cements her as a true hero. Not just a scientist, but a humanitarian. It often gets overlooked, but it's so important.
The Germans are marching on Paris. She takes her entire stock of radium, packs it in a heavy lead case, and gets on a train to Bordeaux to lock it in a bank vault.
Yeah.
She's protecting France's scientific treasure.
But once the radium is safe, she doesn't stay in Bordeaux. She goes right back to Paris, into the danger. She wants to help. And she sees a medical crisis on the front lines.
Surgeons were operating blind.
Completely. A soldier gets hit with shrapnel, and the doctor has to just poke around in the wound with a probe to try and find the metal fragments. It was agonizing, it caused infections, and it led to so many unnecessary amputations.
And Marie knew X-rays could solve this. But the machines were these giant, delicate things in city hospitals.
Yeah.
You can't just drag one into a trench.
So she invented the mobile radiology unit. She realized she had to put the X-ray on wheels.
The petites Curies.
The little Curies. She went out and got cars, limousines donated by wealthy Parisians, delivery vans, whatever she could find, and she retrofitted them. She installed an X-ray machine and a dynamo, a generator that could run off the car's engine.
And she didn't just design them from a safe distance.
No, this is the part I love. This 2-time Nobel laureate taught herself how to drive. She learned auto mechanics so she could fix the cars when they broke down in the mud. She studied anatomy so she could read the x-rays herself and help the surgeons.
And she took her teenage daughter Irene with her to the front lines.
Can you imagine that mother-daughter road trip? Driving into a war zone. And she had to fight the military bureaucracy every step of the way. The army doctors were skeptical. Who is this woman telling us how to do surgery? But once they saw it work, once they saw the shrapnel clearly on the film, they were converted.
What was the scale of this operation? How many people did she help?
The estimates are that her mobile units and the 200 permanent X-ray posts she helped set up treated over 1 million wounded soldiers.
1 million. That's an army of men who kept their limbs or their lives because of her.
And she tried to give even more. She went to the Bank of France and tried to donate her solid gold Nobel medals to be melted down for the war effort.
Did they take some?
The bank refused. They said they couldn't melt down a piece of history, but she took all of her prize money and bought war bonds with it, knowing she'd probably never see that money again. She gave everything to her adopted country.
The same country whose press had called her a homewrecker and whose mobs had thrown stones at her house just 3 years earlier.
It's incredible. After the war, she's a global icon, a war hero. But her lab, the Radium Institute, is broke.
Because radium had become the most valuable substance on Earth.
It was being used for cancer treatments, Curie therapy, they called it.
Yeah.
The price went through the roof to $100,000 a gram, which is like millions today. And Marie had used all her radium for research or given it to the war effort. She had none left for her own work.
And then an American journalist named Missy Maloney shows up.
A real force of nature. She interviews Marie in Paris and is just shocked. She finds the world's most famous scientist working in a lab that can't afford basic equipment. She asks Marie, "What is the one thing you want most in the world?" And Marie says, "I need a gram of radium."
So Missy goes back to the U.S. and basically starts one of the first major crowdfunding campaigns.
Exactly. The Marie Curie Radium Fund. It was a massive campaign aimed at the women of America. Schoolgirls sent in their pennies, women's clubs held fundraisers. And in 1921, they brought Marie over for a victory tour.
And the tour sounds like it was just exhausting for her.
Oh, she was frail by this point. Her eyesight was failing from radiation-induced cataracts. She had a constant humming in her ears. But America treated her like a rock star. Huge crowds, endless receptions, honorary degrees.
And the climax is at the White House with President Warren G. Harding.
He presents her with this ceremonial golden key to a lead-lined box that contains the gram of radium. But there's a tiny detail here that shows you everything about her character. The night before the ceremony, she read the legal deed of gift, and it said the radium was being given to Marie Curie personally.
And she said no.
She refused to accept it. She said it must be given to the laboratory. She was terrified that if it was her personal property, her daughters might inherit it and sell it. It had to belong to science, in perpetuity. She forced them to rewrite the legal documents just hours before meeting the president.
Always protecting the mission over any personal gain.
Always. She did another tour in 1929 to raise money for a radium institute in her beloved Warsaw, which her sister Bronia was going to run. It was a beautiful full circle moment.
But all those years in the shed, all that exposure, the shadow of the radium was catching up to her.
By the 1930s, she was really fading. She was dying from aplastic pernicious anemia. Her bone marrow had essentially been destroyed by decades of exposure to ionizing radiation.
Did she ever admit that it was the radium that was killing her?
She was in denial, really, until the very end. She preferred to blame it on overwork. I think it was hard for her to admit that her great discovery, her child, as she sometimes called it, was also her poison.
She used to keep test tubes of it in her pockets. Huh?
And in her desk drawer. She loved the faint blue light they gave off at night. She called them her fairy lights.
Oh, wow. She died on July 4, 1934, at the age of 66.
And even in death, she broke one last barrier. In 1995, her and Pierre's remains were moved to the Pantheon in Paris, the great mausoleum for France's national heroes. She was the first woman to be interred there on her own merit.
And her coffin, as we said at the start, had to be lined with lead.
Nearly an inch of lead, a final barrier between her radioactivity and the world. You know, her daughter Irene went on to win the Nobel Prize in chemistry as well.
Keeping it in the family.
But Irene also died of leukemia, very likely induced by her own work with radiation. The sacrifice of that family is it's immeasurable.
It brings us to that final ethical point. Marie Curie never patented radium. She never tried to profit from it.
Never. She and Pierre could have been the wealthiest people in the world. They could have created a monopoly, but she always said, radium is an element. It belongs to the people. She believed science was a gift to humanity, not a way to get rich.
So when we step back and look at the whole picture, the oppressed girl in Warsaw, the freezing garret, the shed, the X-ray vans on the battlefield, what's the big takeaway?
For me, it's that she wasn't just a gifted genius who had it easy. She was, above all else, a fighter. She fought the Russian authorities, she fought poverty, she fought the sexism of the French Academy, she fought the xenophobia of the press, and in the end, she fought the very element she discovered. She wasn't a fragile woman in a lab coat, she was a warrior.
The image I'm going to leave with isn't the woman on the Nobel podium. It's the woman in the dark shed, late at night, looking at those test tubes glowing with that faint blue light she loves so much. She loved the science even as it was destroying her.
That is the beautiful, terrible paradox of Marie Curie. The light that guided her life's work was the very fire that consumed her. But because she was willing to walk into that fire, we have modern oncology, we have nuclear physics, and we have a completely new understanding of the universe.
A heavy price, but a monumental gift. If this exploration of Marie Curie's life sparked something in you, or if you're just amazed she knew how to fix a carburetor, please leave a like and subscribe to History Titans.
And maybe share this with a friend who needs a dose of inspiration today.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.